hit book on Amazon that has nearly 300 five-star reviews. It's really awesome to bring on Dr. Kristin Neff to talk to us about self-compassion and how we can love ourselves more. All right, welcome to Thriving Launch. Kristin, are you ready to launch?
I am ready.
Awesome. So you're here talking with Kamala and I, and we've heard a lot about self-compassion and self-love. But here's the thing that always stumps me is, what is self-compassion? It's something that it seems like everybody kind of has a different idea, or self-love, and it's starting to sound a little woo-woo to me, or a little bit kind of out there. So I'd really love to just ask you, can you bring that home for us and help us understand what self-compassion is?
So I do prefer the term self-compassion as opposed to self-love, although love is part of self-compassion. But really, it's very simple. It's being a good friend to yourself, being supportive, kind, encouraging, an inner ally rather than an inner enemy. Most of us are our worst self-critics. We're harsh, we're cruel, we're cold with ourselves, and it really doesn't help at all. So self-compassion just means acknowledging that we are imperfect human beings doing the best we can and trying to be kind to ourselves in the process.
I'd love to hear from you what you recommend to start the process of integrating more self-compassion into our daily lives.
Yes, well, luckily, most people have some experience being kind and compassionate to others. We know what to say when a friend comes and says, "Oh my God, I've just had a horrible day," or "This happened at work." We kind of know how to be supportive, how to give our attention to the person, how to be caring toward them. So, really, with self compassion, it's just giving ourselves the same attention. And believe it or not, we often don't. We're so lost in either struggling with the problem or criticizing ourselves or feeling ashamed or trying to fix things that we just don't pause to say, this is a difficult moment I'm going through right now. I actually need a little kindness and support from myself. So really the first step in being more self-compassionate as part of your daily life is just noticing those moments of suffering and struggle and trying to respond like a good friend.
And how do we do that? I mean, I talk to a lot of parents, and when I talk to parents, I hear the way that they talk to their children, and they're very supportive and very loving. But then
Yes.
when I talk to them, I hear from them about how they talk to themselves. And one of the things that, I've been advised to do, one of the things that I'll advise, couples or parents when I'm talking to them, or friends, even entrepreneurs too, when I'm talking to people and I hear that they're being hard on themselves, I try to ask them, how would you talk to a child if this was you? If this was a little kid version of you, how would you talk to them? Is that kind of what we're talking about with self-compassion?
Exactly. I mean, one of the ways you can give yourself compassion is through that simple question. Would I say this to someone I cared about, a close friend, or my child that I was compassionate toward but loved unconditionally? And sadly, usually the answer is no. I would not treat my friends or the ones I love this way. So it's really just noticing when we're being unkind to ourselves and trying to have a new conversation in our heads. So, I mean, that's kind of the most basic level of self-compassion is speaking to ourselves in a warm, supportive tone of voice, using an encouraging, constructive message as opposed to destructive criticism. But there's also other things you can do to evoke self-compassion. For instance, using some sort of gentle, supportive touch, like putting your hand on your heart or your arm or your face. Often, just as a child responds to physical touch, we are mammals and we have attachment systems and we are designed to respond to warmth and gentle touch. We can actually give that touch to ourselves, which is a kind of very direct way that we can be supportive to ourselves. Even if our minds can't go there, our bodies often feel soothed and comforted by just placing a gentle, tender hand on our own bodies. It's another access point.
This is something that I have really found beneficial is that gentle touch. And I remember being in this 10-day meditation where I couldn't talk to anyone or look at anyone, and we basically just sat there for 10 days and meditated.
Yeah.
And I was about 6 days in, and it was so painful. I was like laying on a bed, like crying, feeling so lonely and feeling so disconnected and wondering what I was doing there and what I was. And then all of a sudden, this hand came up and it just so lovingly brushed the hair from my eyes and face. And I didn't know where that love was coming. I like felt like the most incredible love I'd ever experienced. And then I realized it was my own hand. And it was such an amazing experience that when we give ourselves the time and the space to give the attention to ourselves, I mean, that was the love I'd been looking for my whole life at that point. So
Yes, that's right. And often, even if we are lucky enough to have other people in our lives who meet our needs, if we are cruel to ourselves, if we're cold or unkind, often we can't even really take in the love from others, and we're the only one who is there for us 24/7, so to speak. So creating a supportive, encouraging relationships with ourselves makes such a huge difference. It's really necessary, I believe, in order to be happy. And the research supports it. It's not just my belief. There's a huge empirical literature now showing how important it is to be self-compassionate if we want to have psychological well-being.
I want to dive into that a little bit because I'm recalling when I first started doing this thing called self-talk, right? And self-talk is really about the way that you talk to yourself and having a compassionate conversation with yourself where, maybe I messed up and I go, man, Luis, you're such an idiot, or you messed up. Somehow I just, I'd start saying these things to myself. And I started reading about self-talk and self-compassion and understood that I could change that conversation. And by changing that conversation, I could change the chemistry in my body. I could change my outlook on my life. I could create more success by changing that dialogue that was happening. And I wasn't a victim to it. It was not this automatic thing, that there is actually a part of me that has control over that dialogue. And at first I felt really weird, Kristin. I mean, it was just kind of odd. Like I would mess up and I'd go, oh, it's okay, Luis. Like, you're trying. I'm really proud of you for trying. And yeah, sure, you made a little mistake there, but you know what? There's always tomorrow. And the thing is that you learned something from it. And I'm really excited and proud of you for trying. And like, I can see myself saying that to a kid and feeling like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I'm helping coach his child. But doing this with myself was awkward.
Yeah, it does feel funny at first. The interesting thing, though, is that the opposite habitual pattern doesn't feel funny, does it? I mean, for whatever reason, and I think there are reasons based on family of origin and culture, we don't feel uncomfortable saying, you loser, I'm ashamed of you. What a good for nothing. I can't believe you said that. Right? Treating ourselves like we would someone we don't like very much, that comes very naturally. Now, the whole thing is it's not artificial, but the whole thing is a self-to-self relationship. It's just that we're comfortable, we're used to being an unkind, mean person to ourselves, and we aren't used to being a kind, supportive person to ourselves. So it's really just a matter of choosing how we respond, choosing, are we going to be that kind, compassionate parent, or are we going to be the parent like in the old days, spare the rod and spoil the child?
I'm putting, and I go ahead, continue. I wanted to say that I'm putting myself in the position of when I first got a hold of this information and how revolutionary it can be to have this information.
Yeah, it was for me too. I mean, I certainly didn't invent the idea of self-compassion. I think I've helped study it and bring it into the kind of common culture, but I learned about it in a meditation class I was teaching, and it was an amazing moment for me when I realized I had this resource that I just didn't even know was there, and it made an immediate difference in my life. And I think a lot of people feel that way. It's like, you're kidding. I never thought of that before. I can be that warm, caring, supportive, kind, loving friend to myself 24/7, even at 3 a.m. And, this is actually possible. And that's why it seems to be transforming so many lives.
It's so powerful. And as a business owner, I know that I have been the worst boss to myself. Sometimes
Ah.
in the past, I would just really get down on myself for not producing enough or not getting things done fast enough. And this is something I really struggle with, is having self-compassion. And I have to say that I'm way more productive and I get so much more done, and it's so much more fun when I have self-compassion and grace for where I'm at. What do
Yeah.
you say to the people that are overly busy? They have too much to do, too much on their plate. How can this really help them?
Yeah, well, sadly, for whatever reason, people honestly believe that if they were kind and supportive to themselves, they will be unmotivated. They really think they need to be crack the whip, so to speak, in order to get themselves to do anything, that they'll be lazy and self-indulgent if they're kind to themselves. And it's so sad because again, we know with parenting, for instance, that a compassionate parent doesn't let their child laze around and skip school and eat all the ice cream they want or not achieve anything in their life. When you care about your child or when you care about your friend, you want the best for them. And so you try to encourage and motivate them to reach their goals, but out of love and care, not out of some feeling that they're inadequate as they are. And so the research really clearly shows is that it's the same for ourselves. If we care about ourselves and we don't want to suffer, we want to be happy, we aren't going to be lazy, we aren't going to be self-indulgent, we're going to work hard, we're going to, engage in healthy behaviors. And if we do it with a kind of encouraging, motivational, friendly, constructive mindset, we're going to be actually much more able to achieve our goals. It's quite interesting. Most people have a very hard time accepting that. I think it's just the devil they know. They haven't really tried any other way.
So let's take a deep dive for a moment and assume that everybody in the audience now, we're all on the same page. We believe this can work, but I don't know how to do it. You've convinced me that it works. You've told me there's some science, and guys, you can look up the science by going into Kristin's book on self-compassion. But let's just for a moment say we believe all of it and we're ready to give it a shot.
Yes.
How do I start? What do I do? I mean, can you lead me through some of that process?
Yeah, so I would say maybe the first easiest step is to see if you can find a type of supportive touch, some sort of physical gesture of kindness that feels good for you. For many people, this is maybe placing both hands over their heart center. For some people, it's just simply kind of holding one hand in the other, giving your fingers a little squeeze. Other people, maybe like a self-hug. Other people, they might want to gently stroke their face. People are really different. So taking the time to find, is there a physical gesture that makes me feel comforted and supported? And that's really a nice place to start because that will change your body's, biochemistry and change your nervous system reactivity, allowing you to feel safer and calmer. And then you can follow that up just with asking the very simple question, what would I say to a dear friend I cared about who was going through the exact same situation I was? And usually we know the answer to that. We know what we say, and we also know the tone and the warm tone of voice we would use when we really want to convey to someone that we care and we're there for them. So it's really just a matter of trying to adopt that language and that warm, supportive tone with ourselves. And yeah, it does feel a little awkward at first, definitely, but it's temporary, and you start developing that as a new habit. And before long, this becomes your kind of, default option is being kind to yourself as opposed to being harshly critical.
I know this practice has been really powerful for me. Just even taking deep breaths, even taking a couple of deep breaths is something that has really been beneficial for that self-compassion, because the brain, the body, all of it functions better with breath and oxygen moving through. So that's like the simplest form I could possibly think of, the easiest way to just consciously, in one breath, practice self-compassion.
Yes. And another access point is if you want a kind of fuller definition of what self-compassion is, I define it not only as being a kind, supportive friend to yourself, but there's also two other elements that are really key. One is recognition of common humanity. remembering the kind of obvious fact, but the fact we often forget, which is that everyone is imperfect, everyone makes mistakes, everyone fails. Often when we do fail or make a mistake, we kind of irrationally feel like I'm the only one who's done this, or it's just happening to me. But when we remember that this actually is supposed to be happening, we are supposed to fail and make mistakes, this is what it means to be human, that can really soften the sense of self-focus and isolation we often get. And that can be a pathway into self-compassion. And then the third element is actually kind of what you were referring to with the breath, and that is mindfulness. Just instead of being lost in our difficult emotions, lost in our suffering, taking a moment to step outside of ourselves, take a few breaths, ask what's happening right now. Oh, I see. What's happening right now is I'm feeling grief, or I'm feeling anger, or I'm feeling fear. And that ability to know that we're suffering when we're suffering is actually a really important step for them being able to respond with kindness. So these are actually three doorways into self-compassion: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness.
You know, I'm thinking about some people and maybe even an element of myself that sometimes gets really wrapped up in making other people happy and how important it is that they're happy. Yes. And I'm thinking about how me doing this practice, it's going to probably make me calmer. It's going to make me feel more loving towards myself. It's going to make me a more gentle person. And that should have an impact on others, yes?
Yes, absolutely. It's so funny. Many people are afraid that being self-compassionate means being selfish, not focusing on the needs of others. Well, actually, first of all, research shows that people are better relationship partners when they're more self-compassionate. But think about it. If you are irritated and agitated and down on yourself and negative, you're going to communicate that to everyone you meet, and they're going to feel that. They're going to resonate with you and also kind of pick up some of those negative emotions. But if you can be kind, friendly, supportive, gentle with yourself, then every single person you come in contact with will resonate with that and feel better as a result. So I actually think being self-compassionate is one of the biggest gifts we can give to others, because we are much more able to have, positive relationships with others when we are in a compassionate as opposed to self-critical frame of mind.
I was just thinking about how rampant anxiety is in our culture, and something that I really suffered from for a while due to some traumatic events. I ended up having these series of panic attacks that were very intense, and self-compassion was the way out of that anxiety. It was the most important thing. Louise, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
On that note, too, just a big kudos to Kamla, because, all you thriving launchers, you listen to the show, you've been watching Kamla go through her process, and it's been really cool for me, because today we're having a conversation, and where Kamla and I differ is I'm full of ideas. I generate a lot of ideas. I'm a very high-energy person. There's so much fire. And Kamala's a little bit more, she's a little bit cooler in her way of being, and she's more thoughtful and sees steps and processes, while I just think of dreams like, let's climb the mountain, and Kamala starts thinking about the training and the packing that takes to get there, right? And today we were having a conversation, and I was like, we're going to climb Mount Everest, this is like, I'm sharing these dreams, and we dialogued for a while, and then Kamala, going into her center, she did this very naturally. She just said, I think I'm tapped out. Like, my energy and my resources are now, I need to take some time to kind of just refuel myself. So let's stop the dialogue here so that I can think about how we're going to pack and how we're going to climb that mountain. And in fact, in the past, when Kamla just kept going with me, she would get exhausted, I would get exhausted, then we'd both kind of be upset with each other, then we wouldn't believe the dream anymore, and then we'd just spin out and be very mean to ourselves. And today, Kamla had enough self-compassion and understanding to say, this is where I'm at, I'm tapped, and now I need to go back. And it was just a really wonderful moment for me.
Yeah,
thank you.
Beautiful, yeah.
I mean, these are the kinds of impacts that self-compassion is going to have. Yes, Kristin?
Yes, yes. And also to Kamala's point about the anxiety, one of the biggest benefits of self-compassion is it actually taps into our safety and soothing system, right? As human beings, as infants, when we're born into the world, when we are in the presence of a warm, supportive, caring caregiver, we feel safe. So actually, one of the things we are doing when we give ourselves compassion is we're helping us feel safe. We're letting that part of ourselves know, I'm here for me. I got my own back. I'm not going to abandon you. And that sense of safety is so powerful for counteracting the anxiety we normally feel. So you really kind of felt one of the key features of self-compassion is it helps you feel safe.
Mm.
That's really
And that's
beautiful.
something that is really, really needed for people, whether people realize it or not. That's at some point in our growing up, in our fundamental structure, we stop feeling safe. Whether it was someone was angry and we took it personally, that it was about us, or something small like that, and so that memory lives inside all of us, right?
That's right. And we're so afraid of being rejected for very good reason, right? We're social animals. We need to be loved. We need to feel we belong. But it's kind of ironic because the way we try to belong and be loved by others is by kind of excluding ourselves, by being mean to ourselves, by feeling ashamed and being hard on ourselves. So it's like we're pulling the rug out from underneath ourselves. If we want to be loved and we want to belong, we need to start loving ourselves, and we need to start telling ourselves, you belong, I'm here for you, I'm not going to abandon you. So we really can't expect it from others if we don't give it to ourselves.
Kristen, the nerd side of me is starting to come out, and I'm curious if you could shoot off just a few studies or resources that people can go to. We know you have your book, Self-Compassion, but are there any kind of like studies or research that people can dive into or other bodies of work? And if you can name off a few, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, well, just to say, if you're interested, there's like 900 PDFs of actual published research studies on my website, selfcompassion.org. So if you're a research nerd, you can spend the next 2 weeks reading these studies on my website. There's a huge body of literature. So just maybe to rattle the first one off that comes to my head, people often think that self-compassion is weak. Well, one study looked at soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they found that how self-compassionate soldiers were was more predictive of whether or not they developed PTSD symptoms 9 months later than the level of combat exposure they faced, right? And this basic finding is repeated in a number of different domains with divorce, coping with AIDS, etc. In other words, it's not just what happens to you in your life that determines, your well-being. It's how you relate to yourself. Are you an inner enemy or are you an inner ally? And being an inner ally is strongly linked to being able to strength, coping, resilience, and basically thriving.
That's fantastic. That's great. And it sounds like you have a lot of resources over there on your website. The
Yes.
last piece I wanted to touch on is what is the self-compassion dialogue, when you're talking to yourself? Because I know that's an element we've talked about, putting your hand on your heart or your thumbs together or taking a breath or putting your hand on your own knee, whatever it might be as far as touch. What about the dialogue? What does that look like? And can you play that out a little bit for us so we can feel a tangible experience of it for a moment?
Yeah, okay. So just very quickly, we have something called the self-compassion break, which is a way of reminding ourselves of these three components of self-compassion. So, if you take a moment and just think about something that you're struggling with right now in your life, some situation that's, causing you some difficulty. Maybe I'll just give a moment for your listeners even to just think about one of the situations they're dealing with in their lives right now. And then just really remembering these elements of self-compassion. The first phrase of what we call the self-compassion break is, this is a moment of suffering, right? This is hard. We're bringing mindful awareness to the fact that this situation we're dealing with, this is difficult. This is hard for me. We have to be aware that we're suffering as a first step to open our hearts and response. And then the second phrase is remembering that suffering is a part of life, right? It's not that this shouldn't be happening or something has gone terribly wrong that it's happening, or it's just me this is happening to. These situations, the struggle you're going through, this is part of life. Many people are coping with similar situations, their own flavor, their own version of it. But this really is part of the shared human experience, struggles like these. And then, so because of that, it's really important that we be kind to ourselves. So, in addition to maybe putting a hand on your heart or some other soothing touch, and just taking a moment to say some words of kindness, things you might say to a good friend. Something like, "Gosh, I'm so sorry this is so hard for you. I really care about you. I'm here for you. What do you need? Can I help you in any way?" So those words of kindness, encouragement, and support can be brought in to help us give ourselves what we need. And so really those three basic elements: mindfulness, this is hard, this is suffering; remembering this is part of common humanity; and then kindness in response to the difficulty. That's really all we need to navigate almost, well, not every situation, but many of the difficult situations in our lives. It really makes a big difference.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for being here with us all at Thriving Launch. You've been listening to Kristin Neff. This has been so beautiful to listen to this dialogue on self-compassion. We're going to make sure to include all the resources that Kristin's talked about, her book, her website with the research behind all of this. We're going to include that, as always, at thrivinglaunch.com. Thank you so much for being here. Keep practicing self-compassion.
Thank you both for having me.
You've been listening to the Thriving Launch podcast. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure to head over to thrivinglaunch.com. We'll see you there.
What does it take to be a